I'm here. Here I am. I'm in a different room. Hi, everybody. Here I am. My coworker, Judy, just said, "You're doing tea today? You're doing Frankenstein tea?" Yes, Judy, I am. I just had to use the restroom. So here I am. I'm not upstairs. I am at the library. I am in the downstairs the main floor computer room. Those are puzzles behind me. I've been working in a room where the air conditioner is not working. And so now I'm in an air-conditioned room and it's cold. I could have some tea, but I don't. I have water. I'm going to have a sip of water. Hello, people that are joining. Hello, welcome. Frankenstein Tea is a daily program from the Island Free Library. It is short stories for adult listeners. And I'm going to tell you today a little bit about, hey, LT, hi, Dad. Frankenstein Tea came from this idea of Frankenstein being this like monster of a virus, right? This monster of a time, this monster of a pandemic, this like monster that we're dealing with. And, you know, like this notion of, we're going to have to deal with this. Maybe we can sit down and have some tea and, you know, figure out how to navigate this in some sense of well-being. Not always possible. Definitely not always easy. You know, definitely our sympathies go to those who are having a much harder time with it than perhaps myself. And others that I know, you know, people that are dealing with illness and death, you know, so by no means am I belittling the seriousness of it. I'm just suggesting that, you know, there is daily life and we need to keep moving forward through this. So it's a little bit about Frankenstein Tea as a name, as a nomiker, where it came from. And I wanted to mention that today because I'm reading from a book called Weird Women, classic supernatural fiction by groundbreaking female writers, 1852 to 1923. It's a cool cover, huh? I didn't even notice the cover till I posted it for this event. So take a second and look at that cover. So this is edited, and I'll tell you, but really, you know, what this book is about is, you know, saying Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, you know, was the beginning, right? I mean, it didn't stop there. I don't even know when Frankenstein came into play with these other women, but it's saying to us, suggesting to us that she was not alone in her craft of writing this supernatural monster stories of science fiction and fantasy. And that these other women did this also. So this book is edited by Lisa Morton and Leslie S. Klinger. And I just bought it for the library. Again, Weird Women's classic supernatural fiction by groundbreaking female writers, 1852 to 1923. Edited by Lisa Morton and Leslie S. Klinger, Pegasus Books, New York and London. I bought it for the library because of this program and because I read for this program, but it's brand new. It's 2020. So there you have it. And so to, you know, to further support my storytelling this afternoon, it says the inscription is to Mary Shelley, Mother of Monsters. I love this little book. I read a couple of great stories from here already. I think Judy read one. We'll have to ask Judy later which one she read. She told me she didn't get it. Like the ending she didn't get it. I'm not sure which one that was. I haven't gotten to that one yet. I read a couple though that I liked. I can see us reading from this book a little. And I think they could be legal because they're after the Frankenstein, the other reference to Frankenstein is that it's a permissible read, that it's the copyright laws allow it to be read and recorded and used and all those things because it's over 100 years old. And so this story Yeah, I'm reading a story today from 1896. So I think it is as well a permissible read. But for further clarification on that, I consider all of this permissible as I am a public library director, and part of what I do is readers advisory, which means I turn people onto books and stories and writers and authors. And that's what this is about. Me letting you know we have this new book on our shelf. Maybe this is a genre that you don't normally read or wouldn't normally pick up. I know I wouldn't really go for a sci-fi fantasy, although this program, as you've heard me say, has changed my mind about that. So, it's a permissible read. It's allowed, right? I'm a librarian. I'm going to read you this short story today. I'm going to also say that I just this morning booked a room for my mother and I. We're going to do a quick overnight. We're going to go to an opera out in a lawn, an outdoor event, and we're going to stay overnight near there. And I booked a room in a really old inn, and so this felt like the one to read today. The Lady with the Carnations by Marie Corelli. It was in the Louvre that I first saw her, or rather her picture. Gruzzi painted her, so I was told, but the name of the artist scarcely affected me. I was absorbed in the woman herself, who looked at me from the dumb canvas with that still smile on her face and that burning cluster of carnations clasped to her breast. I felt that I knew her. Moreover, there was a strange attraction in her eyes that held mine fascinated. It was as though she said, "Stay still. I have told thee all." A faint blush tinged her cheek. One loose tress of hair fell caressingly on her half uncovered bosom. And surely I was dreaming, or did I smell the odor of carnations on the air? I started from my reverie. A slight tremor shook my nerves. I turned to go. An artist carrying a large easel and painting materials just then approached and, placing himself opposite the picture, began to copy it. I watched him at work for a few moments. His strokes were firm and his eye accurate. But I knew, without waiting to observe his further progress, that there was an indefinable something in that pictured face that he, with all his skill, would never be able to delineate as Gruzzi had done. If Gruzzi indeed were the painter, of which I did not then and do not now feel sure. I walked slowly away. On the threshold of the room, I looked back. Yes, there it was, that fleeting, strange, appealing expression that seemed mutely to call to me, that half-wild yet sweet smile that had a world of unuttered pathos in it. A kind of misgiving troubled me, a presentiment of evil that I could not understand, and, vexed with myself for my own foolish imaginings, I hastened down the broad staircase that led from the picture galleries and began to make my way out through that noble hall of ancient sculpture in which stands the defiantly beautiful Apollo Belvedere and the world-famous Artemis. The sun shone brilliantly. Numbers of people were passing and repassing. Suddenly, my heart gave a violent throb, and I stopped short in my walk, amazed and incredulous. Who was that seated on the bench close to the Artemis reading? Who, if not the lady with the carnations, clad in white, her head slightly bent, and her hand clasping a bunch of her own symbolic flowers? Nervously, I approached her. As my steps echoed on the marble pavement, she looked up. Her gray-green eyes met mine in that slow, wistful smile that was so indescribably sad. Confused as my thoughts were, I observed her pallor and the ethereal delicacy of her face and form. She had no hat on, and her neck and shoulders were uncovered. Struck by this peculiarity, I wondered if the other people who were passing through the hall noticed her dishabille. I looked around me inquiringly. Not one passerby turned a glance in our direction. Yet surely the lady's costume was strange enough to attract attention. A chill of horror quivered through me. Was I the only one who saw her sitting there? This idea was so alarming that I uttered an involuntary exclamation. The next moment, the seat before me was empty. The strange lady had gone, and nothing remained of her but the strong, sweet odor of the carnations she had carried. With a sort of sickness at my heart, I hurried out of the Louvre and was glad when I found myself in the bright Paris streets filled with eager, pressing people, all bent on their different errands of business or pleasure. I entered a carriage and was driven rapidly to the Grand Hotel, where I was staying with a party of friends. I refrained from speaking of the curious sensations that had overcome me. I did not even mention the picture that had exercised so weird an influence upon me. The brilliancy of the life we led, the constant change and activity of our movements, soon dispersed the nervous emotion I had undergone, and though sometimes the remembrance of it returned to me, I avoided dwelling on the subject. 10 or 12 days passed, and one night we all went to the Théâtre Français. It was the first evening of my life that I ever was in the strange position of being witness to a play without either knowing its name or understanding its meaning. I could only realize one thing, namely, that the lady with the carnations sat in the box opposite to me, regarding me fixedly. She was alone. Her costume was unchanged. I addressed one of our party in a low voice. Do you see that girl opposite, in white, with the shaded crimson carnations in her dress? My friend looked, shook her head, and rejoined, No, where is she sitting? Right opposite, I repeated in a more excited tone. Surely you can see her. She is alone in that large box en face. My friend turned to me in wonder. You must be dreaming, my dear. That large box is perfectly empty. Empty? I knew better, but I endeavored to smile. I said I had made a mistake, that the lady I spoke of had moved, and so changed the subject. But throughout the evening, though I feigned to watch the stage, my eyes were continually turning to the place where she sat so quietly, with her steadfast, mournful gaze fixed upon me. One addition to her costume, she had a fan, which from the distance at which I beheld it seemed to be made of very old yellow lace, mounted on sticks of filigree silver. She used this occasionally, waving it slowly to and fro in a sort of dreamy, meditative fashion. And ever and again she smiled that pained, patient smile which, though it hinted much, betrayed nothing. When we rose to leave the theater, the lady with the carnations rose also, and drawing a lace wrap about her head, she disappeared. Afterwards, I saw her gliding through one of the outer lobbies. She looked so slight and frail and childlike, alone in the pushing, brilliant crowd, that my heart went out to her in a sort of fantastic tenderness. Whether she be a disembodied spirit, I mused, or an illusion called up by some disorder of my own imagination, I do not know. But she seems so sad that even were she a dream, I pity her. This thought passed through my brain as, in company with my friends, I reached the outer door of the theater. A touch on my arm startled me. A little white hand clasping a cluster of carnations rested there for a second, then vanished. I was somewhat overcome by this new experience, but my sensations this time were not those of fear. I became certain that this haunting image followed me for some reason, and I determined not to give way to any foolish terror concerning it, but to calmly await the course of events that would, in time, I felt convinced, explain everything. I stayed a fortnight longer in Paris without seeing anything more of the lady with the carnations, except photographs of her picture in the Louvre, one of which I bought, though it gave but a feeble idea of the original masterpiece. And then I left for Brittany. Some English friends of mine, Mr. and Mrs. Fairley, had taken up their abode in a quaint old rambling chateau near Quimperle, on the coast of Finisterre, and they had pressed me cordially to stay with them for a fortnight, an invitation which I gladly accepted. The house was built on a lofty rock overlooking the sea. The surrounding coast was eminently wild and picturesque. And on the day I arrived, there was a boisterous wind which lifted high the crests of the billows and dashed them against the jutting crags with grand and terrific uproar. Mrs. Fairley, a bright, practical woman whose life was entirely absorbed in household management, welcomed me with effusion. She and her two handsome boys, Rupert and Frank, were full of enthusiasm for the glories and advantages of their holiday resort. "Such a beach!" cried Rupert, executing a sort of Indian war dance beside me on the path. "And such jolly walks and drives," chorused his brother. "Yes, really," warbled my hostess in her clear, gay voice. "I'm delighted we came here. And the chateau is such a funny old place, full of odd nooks and corners. The country people, you know, are dreadfully superstitious, and they say it is haunted. But of course, that's all nonsense. Though, if there were a ghost, we should send you to interrogate it, my dear." This with a smile of good-natured irony at me. I laughed. Mrs. Fairley was one of those eminently sensible persons who had seriously lectured me on a book known as A Romance of Two Worlds, as incalculating spiritualistic theories and therefore deserving condemnation. I turned the subject. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 3 weeks, and we haven't explored half the neighborhood yet. There are parts of the house itself we don't know. Once upon a time, so the villagers say, a great painter lived here. Well, his studio runs the whole length of the chateau, and that and some other rooms are locked up. It seems they are never let to strangers. Not that we want them. The place is too big for us as it is." "What was the painter's name?" I inquired, pausing as I ascended the terrace to admire the grand sweep of the sea. "Oh, I forget. His pictures were so like those of Greuze, that few can tell the difference between them. And," I interrupted her. "Tell me," I said with a faint smile, "have you any carnations growing here?" "Carnations? I should think so. The place is full of them. Isn't the odor delicious?" And as we reached the highest terrace in front of the chateau, I saw that the garden was ablaze with these brilliant scented blossoms of every shade, varying from the palest pink, salmon pink, to the deepest, darkest scarlet. This time, that subtle fragrance was not my fancy, and I gathered a few of the flowers to wear in my dress at dinner. Mr. Fairley now came out to receive us, and the conversation became general. I was delighted with the interior of the house. It was so quaint and old and suggestive. There was a dark oaken staircase with a most curiously carved and twisted balustrade. Some ancient tapestry still hung on the walls, and there were faded portraits of stiff ladies in ruffs and maliciously smiling knights in armor that depressed rather than decorated the dining room. The chamber assigned to me upstairs was rather bright than otherwise. It fronted the sea and was cheerfully and prettily furnished. I noticed, however, that it was next door to the shut up and long deserted studio. The garden was, as Mrs. Fairley had declared, full of carnations. I never saw so many of these flowers growing in one spot. They seemed to spring up everywhere, like weeds, even in the most deserted and shady corners. I had been at the chateau some 3 or 4 days when one morning I happened to be walking alone in a sort of shrubbery at the back of the house when I perceived in the long, dank grass at my feet a large gray stone that had evidently once stood upright but had now fallen flat, burying itself partly in the earth. There was something carved upon it. I stooped down and, clearing away the grass and weeds, made out the words, Manon, que perfide. Surely this was a strange inscription, treacherous heart. I told my discovery to the Fairleys, and we all examined and re-examined the mysterious slab without being able to arrive at any satisfactory explanation of its pictures. Even inquiries made among the villagers failed to elicit anything save shakes of the head and such remarks as, "Oh, madame, si on se va," or "Je crois bien qu'il y a une histoire là." One evening, we all returned to the chateau at rather a later hour than usual, after a long and delightful walk on the beach in the mellow radiance of a glorious moon. When I went to my room, I had no inclination to go to bed. I was wide awake and, moreover, in sort of a expectant frame of mind. Expectant, though I knew not what I expected. I threw my window open, leaning out and looking at the moon-enchanted sea, and inhaling the exquisite fragrance of the carnations wafted to me on every breath of the night wind. I thought of many things: the glory of life, the large benevolence of nature, the mystery of death, the beauty and certainty of immortality. And then, though my back was turned to the interior of my room, I felt I was no longer alone. I forced myself to move round from the window, slowly but determinedly. I brought myself to confront whoever it was